So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee. The meeting today is open to the public, and we have received one question from a member of the public, which we'll get to as soon as possible. Please, can I request that mobile phones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. There's no fire alarm, correction, there's no fire test planned today. So if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff. The assembly point is in Tudor Square. I think we'll just introduce ourselves as members of the committee. Councillor Miskell.
Councillor Ben Miskell, Deputy Chair and Park and Alberthorne Ward Councillor.
Councillor Tom Hunt, I'm Councillor for Walkley Ward.
Hello, Councillor Ruth Milsom. I'm substituting for Councillor Jane Dunn today. I'm a member in Crooks and Crosspool Ward.
Councillor Minesh Parekh, member for Crooks and Crosspool Ward.
Councillor Curtis Crossland, member for Bayton Ward.
Councillor Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Councillor Henry Nottage, Councillor for Hillsborough Ward. Paul Turpin, Green Councillor, Gleadless Valley.
And I'm Councillor Martin Smith, Chair of this committee and Ward Member for Doran Totley. So thank you very much. We've already had apologies for absence from Councillor Jane Dunn. Exclusion of the public and press. I need to make people aware that on item 12 of the agenda, there's an appendix which is not available to the public or press because it contains exempt information. So if members wish to discuss their information in that appendix, I'll ask members of the public and press to kindly leave, and we'll halt that part of the webcast. But what we'll do is we'll cover all the other items on that particular item first and leave that appendix to the end so as not to disrupt the meeting, if that's okay with everybody. The next item is declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda? Councillor Milsom.
Look, it's just a belt and braces, really. I am a small business owner. I've never received any benefits from any council schemes, but in case I did in the future, I'll declare the interest now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Next, we have minutes of the previous meeting. We need to approve, as a correct record, the minutes of the meeting that was held on 7th of September and the 19th of October. Does anybody have any questions? I'll go to Councillor Crossland first and then Councillor Parekh.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was the September meeting where I asked about the LGBTQ plus quota that was referred to this committee for council. I was told that somebody would go away and have a look at that and then bring it back to the committee, but I can't see it referenced in the minutes and I can't see it in the work programme. So with our LGBTQ plus quota solely relying on 2 nightclubs at the moment that are both under threat, I think it's quite important that we have a look at this so it doesn't accidentally get dropped.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I did see that item in the press. Diana, is there an update or can you put it on the work programme? Or?
Yeah, if we add it to the work programme officially, and we'll also work with members of the TRC committee on that, I think. It might be across to their committee too, which is might got lost, but we can pick that up and make sure we put a briefing in as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Parekh?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just, I noticed the minutes don't record the discussion we had about the developing the new city culture strategy. Just it doesn't include some of the discussions we had. I wondered if they could be I just want to check if the points that we raised were noted and factored into the design process and if the minutes could be amended to include that discussion as well. I think it just kind of notes.
So if I've understood that correctly, you think there's a bit missing from the minutes?
Yeah, so we had quite an extensive discussion about how we should develop the culture strategy and kind of the engagement that should take place in, but I don't think that's in the minutes itself.
Okay, personally I don't recall that, but it's quite possible. Perhaps if we have a discussion about that after the meeting, about what you think needs to be included, is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's, just references to the discussion we had itself. But.
Is that something we can do?
Yes, absolutely. I do recall some of the discussion around making sure the culture sector doesn't just talk about the big anchor institutions, but how its grassroots needs to involve community organisations in the engagement and the development. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Yeah, so, we can provide something for the formal record, but we've definitely noted it. Thanks.
Anything else, colleagues? Okay, so we move on to public questions and petitions. We don't have any petitions today, but I understand we have one question from a member of the public. Great, so you know how that works. Could you introduce yourself and ask your questions, please?
Yeah, I'm Alison Norris, and I'm here on behalf of Sheffield Climate Alliance today. And it's a question in three parts. Retrofitting housing has significant potential to generate wealth for Sheffield by increasing local business opportunities and creating good quality local jobs. And what we wanted to know is, how is the council, first of all, making sure it understands our small and medium enterprise sector and the barriers facing SMEs who wish to bid for PAS 2035 compliant retrofitting work? So that's supporting small firms that want to bid. And how is the council using development of the council's community wealth building charter to analyse and address any procurement barriers faced by SMEs? And how is the council networking with other city councils and with combined authorities to share lessons about how to increase procurement from local supply chains? For example, the initiative NEPO 0233, which is the North East Procurement Organisation's retrofit and decarbonisation works.
Thank you for the questions. As you said, some detailed questions there. So I asked council officers to prepare an answer, which I'll read out. It's quite long, fair bit of detail. So what I will do is we'll make sure that either before you leave today, or we've got your contact details, we can send you a formal response. So, as I said, it's a long answer, so I can't memorise it, so I'm going to have to read it out, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fair enough.
So, the council works with SMEs right across Sheffield through its supply chain engagement, economic development, and employment and skills functions. The council supports local construction SMEs to understand the skills their workforce need to gain compliance with PAS 2035 and PAS 230, and to support them to access that training. We're capacity building within local training providers to meet these needs. We're also helping local businesses to build capacity so they can apply for contracts and subcontracts, as well as ensuring that they're marketed locally. We also apply due consideration to how we procure in line with our ethical procurement policy to ensure that wherever possible, packages are suitable for the local market. The council considers social value in all its procurement and planning activities, and we use these tools to lever in additional benefits in terms of growth, social equity, sustainability, and innovation. And that includes setting targets for and supporting contractors to spend locally and facilitate employment and training of local people. This has been further strengthened apologies. This has been further strengthened in the soon-to-be-published local plan. Sheffield City Council leads the Regional Strategic Procurement Group Construction Subgroup, that's a heck of a title, which brings together construction procurement professionals from across the Yorkshire and Humber region. And this maximises participation from local SMEs and is at the forefront of the group's agenda. The Council are happy to listen and take on further good practice and feedback from SMEs at any time. For higher value works, we sometimes use something called the Your Hub suite of regional frameworks, amongst others. That hub delivers a supply chain engagement program which links smaller local contractors with larger principal contractors with the aim of them securing work through principal contractors' supply chain. Sometimes projects are too large in scale or value, or perhaps too broad in a professional discipline for one smaller contractor to undertake work. That's when being part of a wider local supply chain can really boost local businesses. And finally, we consider a range of procurement options for every procurement we undertake, and are of course happy to consider NEPO's new framework, although we understand that hasn't been officially launched yet, alongside other frameworks, dynamic purchasing systems, or conventional competitive procurements. So as I said, a bit of a long answer, that one, and hope that answers your question, and we can provide that to you in writing as well. Thank you for coming along. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is the work programme. I think that's you, Abby. Do you want to just take us through that?
Thank you, Chair. So the work programme starts at page 23 of the agenda. We've got a couple of extra items that we're asking for it to be added at pages 26 to 28. We need to, and apologies for me, I forgot to amend recommendation 4. So we need to amend recommendation 4 for members to approve the inclusion of the 2 items included at part 2 of the report. The work programme has been updated and is now complete. So if members have got any questions, there's officers here who can answer any specifics that they might have. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Abby. Does any member have a question on the work programme? Councillor Perek.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Abby. Yeah, just basically, so on page 24, where it has references from council or other committees, it doesn't list any of the references, but I know the amended motion on renewable energies passed at the last full council meeting included a specific reference for this committee to ensure training opportunities and new skills are including all projects related to energy efficiency and renewables. The Transport Committee would work with this committee to deliver that. I know at the most recent TRC meeting, they had a item on the local renewable energy fund. I think it would be good for our committee to pick that up and work with them on that. But that was a reference to our committee on full council, which, yeah, hasn't been included.
I'll take the other comment from Councillor Hunt first before...
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to come to page 36, where we've got an item on green jobs and skills, which is not yet allocated to a committee meeting. And I was going to suggest that we schedule that in for March so that it happens in this municipal year. We have a full committee briefing on that in December. And so March seems like a good timescale to then work that up for a full meeting.
Thank you, colleagues. Anybody object to that? I think I
thought we were discussing that the other day, as in, I think, is it February, the next formal meeting, but maybe we could put urgent subcommittee in January. Have I remembered that right?
Yeah, I think we discussed that in a pre-meeting to this one. We've noted that we've got a very full, healthy work programme. The next meeting of the committee isn't scheduled until I think the 22nd of February.
Yeah.
So I think not for now, but we might want to consider, with the amount of work we've got to do, whether we try and schedule something in for January.
I've got members' PAs looking for a date from January meeting. It won't be an urgency sub, it'll just be a full meeting of the committee.
Great. So unless there's anything else, Councillor Perec.
Thanks, Chair. Last thing. I mean, on that point of having an overloaded work programme, I know hasn't been assigned to a meeting, but the inclusive economy and wellbeing economy item, there's a reference to the public engagement and consultation on that being factored into the new city strategy. I was just wondering, rather than have that as a separate agenda item to try and find time for, could we wrap that into February's agenda item on developing our new city goals? And just, I think we're all happy to agree that the inclusive economy and wellbeing economy is central to our city goals anyway. It makes sense to have that packaged together rather than try and find a separate time for a different agenda item.
So that's a modification to the future work programme, not to what we're discussing today.
Yeah, so it's in the work programme on page 36, but we haven't found a date for it. I just wonder if that could be mixed into the...
Ryan?
Yeah, this was it's an old item that's been referred to us from the transition committees, and something that we have been shaping the city goals work with. So I've tried to, in the table, recommend what the councillors recommending, that actually we start to look at that through the city goals process, and we no longer probably need an individual item and discussion on the wellbeing economy, that it will be informed by that. What we will do, and we're working towards, is a full committee briefing on the wellbeing economy. We've got some really good national links with Greg Fell, so we're looking at putting a workshop together, which again it says in their programme. So I think what we're agreeing today is that we'll do a workshop instead of have it as a committee item, and we'll make sure it's included in the city goal updates, which are scheduled for February.
Not seeing anybody object to that, can I also suggest that perhaps myself, the Vice Chair and the spokesperson for the Green Group, we might want to get together and just review the work programme and options for the January meeting. Is that okay? Fine, thank you very much. I understand we have to make that slightly more formal. So there was an amended recommendation number 4, and whether we should include that within the work programme. Does anybody object to that? Great, I think we've carried that one. Got to do things properly.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Can I just check that the points that I raised in item 5 will also be addressed with the work programme going forward as well, please?
Yeah, you should see that.
Yeah, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so on this part 2, there's a list of items that we need to discuss to add to the work programme, so it should appear in that next time. And once we've got an initial briefing in and determine what needs to come and when, we'll then schedule it properly, but it should be on there next time. Thanks.
Okay, I think we can move on. That's great, thank you very much. So we come to the first substantive item on the agenda today, which is the approval to procure partners for delivery of the Multiply funding grant from the SYMCA. And I think, Eleanor, you're here to just give us a briefing on that and take us through it. Hi, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is about the Multiply Numeracy Grant, which is Department for Education funding that's being channeled to us through the Mayoral Authority. And it's about raising awareness and attainment of maths in the adult population. Approximately 17 million adults in the UK population have math skills that are akin to a primary school child, which is about half of the working population. The funding is part of the Levelling Up agenda, which is replacing the ESF within the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, with Multiply as the first part of that, which is the direct initiative for adult training. What we hope to do is channel this through to the most vulnerable in the city to raise that awareness of maths and hopefully set people on a pathway to gaining a level 2 qualification in maths for those that haven't achieved one previously at school or as an adult learner. There'll be a range of interventions across the city, from engagement through to small activities, through to long periods of learning to achieve their goals in maths. We hope to work with a wide number of partners across the VCF sector, training partners and employers as well. The funding will be channeled not only to unemployed people, but people in employment and for those wishing to plan further succession in their careers. If there's any further questions regarding the funding.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. I'd like to take Chair's prerogative by saying that statistic in the first line of the report, it's absolutely shocking, isn't it? I mean, if you consider what Sheffield's got just under 1% of the UK population, that means it's 150,000, maybe more people in Sheffield.
Yeah,
it's really affecting their life chances, isn't it? So
absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of attention grabbing, you couldn't get more attention grabbing than that. So, colleagues, questions? I've got Councillor Masters. Please.
Thank you, Chair. I've read the report, and I mean, I had to write it down because there was so much I could say, because I'm now a retired maths teacher. All right, so I've extensive experience of working with young adults, non-achievers aiming at functional skills or GCSE maths qualifications. I've read the Multiply Investment Prospectus and fully support its aims and welcome the grant funding. I mean, I've seen quite a few reports like that over the years, I must admit. However, I do have concerns over the delivery. Right, has there been any analysis of why the local figures are so shocking? If the level of maths is at a primary school standard, it suggests many problems start in secondary. We've no influence over that. But what happens there? But without insight into the barriers created here in Sheffield, we're in danger of repeating the same mistakes. And I try, because believe me, I could go on quite somewhere. And the other thing is, I've also sort of been involved with a lot of ESOL learners. And this doesn't just apply to those, it also applies to a lot of those who don't achieve. And it is the specific language of maths. I'm not talking about sort of the full maths language. I'm talking about the way it is used in an everyday context. And I've never yet seen a curriculum which has dealt with that aspect of maths teaching, because it either sort of qualifications are numeracy with sort of some embedded mathematical language, or literacy. But I've taught quite a few very, very highly educated, very highly qualified people in mathematics, and they cannot pass level 1 functional skills or even entry level simply because of the colloquial use of maths in everyday workplace, which is why when you say you hope to engage with employers, I hope you will engage with employers, but also, so the overall concern is the quality of the delivery. Too much of it that I've seen has been in front of a computer, and that's not the same as actually sort of getting them to engage with maths. So if you like, sort of, the question is, well, I'm not sure what the question is now because I keep, basically sort of, it's looking at the quality of the courses to make sure that they actually do deliver, because as I say, it's the overarching thing between maths language and literacy, and there isn't anything, so it's getting them confident. Sorry, I should have read what I said rather than go through that, but it is the quality. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in answer to some of what you've stated there, I absolutely understand that, and all of the activity we're doing is going to be face-to-face. And a portion of that activity is absolutely working in the community with ESOL providers and ESOL learners to make sure we develop appropriate curriculum to really embed the understanding of numeracy language. A lot of the data we've got has come from the Department for Education. That informs us about the national picture, but we are working with the Mayoral Authority as well and other providers to fully understand that local picture and target the funding where it's most needed.
Yeah, I think that concerns me because you're using the language that I've heard over a decade, basically. And statistics can hide a variety of detail, and it's often the detail that matters and gives the breakthrough to a lot of these people. I'll leave it there, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Nottage?
My understanding from reading the briefing papers is that the multiply funding can't be used to cover direct delivery of numeracy training that should come under adult education. Can any of it be used to provide language assistance to deliver numeracy training to people whose English isn't their first language, where the training that is provided under adult education may not be so accessible?
The basic premise of the numeracy, the multiply funding is that it mustn't replace or displace the adult education budget funding. So all of the activity we do is about engaging people to prepare them to move on to that pathway. So absolutely we need a range of people that can deliver that initiative to meet the needs of all the different types of learners that we work with. Thank you.
Councillor Masters again, if it's a quick one.
A final comment. Are you sure there will be enough numeracy specialists out there to actually deliver the programme? Because there's a shortage already.
One of the initiatives that we're working on with the Mayoral Authority is actually to build capacity, because we do recognise that there is a shortfall of numeracy or maths practitioners in the FE sector nationally. It is an issue, so that is part of the programme.
Councillor Turpin? I was just trying to be fair, looking at both sides there for a second.
Thanks. So you're asking us to recommend that you are able to go forward with the subcontracting for this service. So will there be any particular preference to have a local provider, or is this one of those things where we could end up with an organisation from the other end of the country providing this service?
Potentially, that it could be any provider that's registered on the portal where we have to put the subcontracting out through. But we hope that the questions and the subcontracting process will attract local providers, because they're the ones with the knowledge around the needs and vulnerabilities of the local population.
And will there be any acknowledgement of that in the scoring of applications?
I'm not aware of the exact questions. I haven't got them in front of me, but the questions will be levelled to sort of select the appropriate providers that can meet the needs of the local population.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. If there are no more questions, famous last words. Councillor Miskell.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick a little bit further with regards to the question that colleague asked about procurement. It rings alarm bells a little bit to me when we take ourselves back to, I think it was the national catch-up programme, wasn't it, that the government had, particularly for young people who are under 16. I appreciate that this is for adult learners, but we know that Randstad was a private company that got that contract. It was on the government's list of approved contractors. It does worry me somewhat that this is a feast for private companies who don't have any links to our local community and don't necessarily understand the specific needs that people across Sheffield and South Yorkshire may have. Would you be able to give a little bit more detail about the list of approved contractors? Is that, and you mentioned specifically a portal, is the portal a DFE government portal? And how do providers get onto that list of approved providers?
Okay, the portal is the Your Tender portal. It's an approved portal that we use here in Sheffield. There's a simple process for providers to register on that portal, and we're guided on the use of that through our procurement services.
Councillor Milson, did you have a question?
I did, yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry. Just a little bit further on the same subject, really. Is the funding? Can it be spent on local training, or can it be spent on supporting a new local agency to provide this sort of work, or is that outside the scope of the funding? So if there were, say, a small potential consortium of tutors who might be able to, to provide this locally, would it be possible to support that?
Potential providers would register through the Your Tender portal, and there'll be a series of criteria that they would have to meet to be registered on the portal to apply for the funding. It would depend on them meeting that criteria.
So so they need to be oven ready, as it were?
They need to be registered, I believe, as a UK provider.
Councillor Miskell again.
I'd just like to ask a little bit more about the rationale for us not potentially insourcing some of this work. Is there a condition within the funding that means that Sheffield City Council couldn't run some of these services ourselves? I'm particularly mindful because we do have lots of existing provision, and we would deliver very good outcomes for young people, and also we'd pay people conditions. Was there some rationale with putting it out for external tender, and can we bid ourselves?
Some of the delivery will be done by the current adult learning team, which sits in my work area. So that will be our direct delivery to the residents of Sheffield, and then a proportion of it through that Your Tender portal to hopefully many local providers.
Okay, I think we're done. Thank you, Eleanor. We have a recommendation before us, colleagues, and that is to approve the option to subcontract funding awarded to SCC from the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority over 3 financial years to March 2025. Are we all agreed on that? If anybody doesn't agree, could you please indicate? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, Eleanor. We now move to the next item, which is an update on the city's business recovery plan. I believe Yvonne Asquith and Diana Buckley are presenting on that.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, and we've got 2 guests joining us as well. So we've got Alexis, who's the chair of our business response group, and Esther, who's a business information officer. So can I ask them to join now? That might mean you have to move.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks. So just in terms of this report, it aims to do 2 things really. The first is to give you an update on the business recovery plan achievements, essentially. So that is in the appendix of the report and does show some really good outputs, which I'll cover a little bit in the presentation. But the focus of today, we wanted to look at the cost of living crisis and energy prices, the impact on businesses now, and there was a particular discussion that you asked for at the last meeting, hence why we've brought people who represent the business community and talked to them regularly into the room as well. So the report details some of the information that we're getting from the high street, which Yvonne's going to speak through for us, and how we are looking to support businesses where we can at the moment, and how we're developing programmes to make sure that there's support there going forward. There are issues that the high street are facing, as you're all aware, that aren't at the council's disposal to fix, and I think it's useful also though for this committee to understand what they are and how we can all support businesses in those particular things. So if I hand over to Yvonne initially, we're going to start the presentation and then hand over to Alexis and then take questions at that point. Okay, thanks. Just to kick off then, these are some of the successful elements of the business recovery plan. I don't want to dwell on all of these, but just a couple. So the Economic Recovery Fund, we have delivered the first wave of that fund, £2 million into 15 district centre projects and a Summer in the Outdoor City visitor campaign. We're really seeing some of the...
Sorry, Diana, can I just interrupt there? So, colleagues, that's quite small print. Has everybody got a copy in front of them?
No, not sent it to members.
Okay, can everybody read that okay?
Send it to members after.
The details in the appendix in the report as well.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not verbatim, but everything about that project is in the report. So the Economic Recovery Fund has been delivered, and successfully so. We've had an evaluation, which you saw here last time, and we're into ERF round 2 now. The Summer in the Outdoor City campaign increased footfall dramatically in the city centre, and in fact we got a most recovered high street acknowledgement from Centre for Cities for some of the work we did around there. And the low carbon business support programme has been oversubscribed. A lot of activity, a lot of businesses wanting to access the energy audits and the grants through that. We've also done a lot of collaboration and work with partners around attracting people to Sheffield and updating the Welcome to Sheffield website, as well as change the way we've been delivering business support. So it's worth looking at the appendix of the report to see how much activity that business recovery plan has kind of spurred in the city, and some of the results that are on the back of that. However, I want to move on today to some of the issues that we know businesses are facing in this current crisis, and I think the phrase is perma-crisis, and it kind of actually does feel worse now than it did in COVID to a lot of businesses. So I think it's worth spending the majority of the time today for the committee to understand some of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Di. Like Di says, we know that lots of businesses are being affected by the cost of living. Our focus has been, quite rightly, I think, on high street businesses recently, because we know that they are the most vulnerable. They were affected the most during COVID. So much of our kind of resource and our involvement in we are leading on the business work stream of the cost of living programme in the council, the operational group. And, you know, much of that has been around high street businesses and what they're facing at the moment. So just to kind of paint the picture in terms of what the data is saying, we know that city centre footfall has improved, but it's not yet at pre-pandemic levels. The number of new businesses, opening is down 8%, whilst business closures are up 14%. We work quite closely with environmental health colleagues, and we know that the number of business closures that they're having to make, because businesses are unfortunately not reaching regulatory requirements around food safety, health and safety requirements, you know, is happening, and unfortunately those numbers are increasing. Much of the high street issues are around energy price increases, and the cost of their supplies and goods have just gone through the roof, really. Anecdotally, our business information officers, so we have 6 business information officers that work on all our high streets. Esther is with us today, looking a little bit shocked. So Esther is one of our business information officers, and you know, from across the team, I think it's fair to say that the number of businesses that are up for sale has increased quite significantly on the high streets recently. And also many businesses, this is not all businesses, but many businesses are quite exhausted on the high street. They've been through COVID as well, had to reopen, and then are hit by another crisis which is affecting them enormously. So some businesses are now considering closing after Christmas. you know, to see really whether things pick up or not. Like I say, it is not all businesses, but we are seeing an increase. Just in relation to some of the work that the business information officers are doing and their role in then identifying some of those key issues that other council services can help us with as well. So really practical advice actually. Like Di said, we don't have government grants to give out to businesses. So we're just trying to support businesses as much as we can with advice. So helping businesses really with practical things around understanding their energy prices and bills, finding ways to save and make more money, helping them work through council processes. We're working really closely with other council services to help businesses to get answers to their questions really quickly, and helping them just with practical things like resolving issues with their cash flow, and actually where necessary in some cases helping them close safely as well. That's not to say that we are not working with some businesses on the high street that actually are growing in some respects and have pivoted their businesses well. It's just that we're seeing an increase in high street businesses facing these issues really. Part of our role, as well as having advice on the ground, is very much around communications messages, which we've been working with the Chamber and the BID really closely on. So just really practical things that we know our information officers are doing on a drop-in basis to businesses, and actually getting those out much wider to our business base. So these are just examples of the resources that we've done for cost of living, specifically aimed at smaller businesses, where you know, access to national information myth busting is probably less so than with bigger businesses. So this is just a postcard which will actually be out and about this week, and that just kind of reflects the support that we're able to give individual businesses, and just a phone call for them to contact Business Sheffield, and you know, we can immediately get an advisor to them the following day. That's very little, but basically I'll cover what they cover. So 5 individual resource sheets. These will be translated into the 9 community languages that we translate all our business resources into. Practical resources around saving energy for food businesses, saving energy in your business, taking control of costs and income, support with bills, and energy suppliers, contracts and bills. So we've actually worked with the Chamber and with the BID to develop these, and also with our legal colleagues as well, to ensure that they're fully signed off, and you know, that they make sense, because it's quite, in some ways, you know, it's quite complicated information that we need to get absolutely right. So they've been developed over the last couple of months and are being distributed this week. Because the council are doing a cost of living communications all of this week, and they're going out this week on our website. The physical resources will be also ready this week, and also partners like the Chamber sharing those messages as well. So I think it's just really important that we share those messages as much as possible. The next slide, you will not be able to see this.
We'll circulate these. So
yeah, we will circulate this. I just think this is just a really good example. So that's Esther there in the corner. Esther wrote this piece for Unlimited magazine, so that's a local business magazine. And the article just really kind of highlights the kind of specialist support that those advisors are giving to individual businesses about pivoting, about reducing menus, you know, looking at energy that the business is using. So it's just a good example of the kinds of specialist provision that we're able to do on the high street, door to door. Esther, I'm sure Esther will be able to answer any questions that you've got about that resource. I mean, just really quickly, I won't labour this, but we are working with bigger businesses as well in the city. They're just kind of a couple of examples, really. So we have 6 growth advisors as well who are working with larger SMEs in the city, 2 tech scale-up advisors as well who are supporting tech businesses to start up and scale. We also have a toolkit at the moment for SMEs, and actually These are proving massively helpful for SMEs. So productivity grants, allowing businesses to access the grant for a piece of machinery, for example, to make them more productive. And actually, this is a South Yorkshire programme. In Sheffield, we've had 103 of the 307 businesses who have been successful with this programme have come from Sheffield. We do really well with our advisors in identifying businesses and helping them apply for these. And unlike the myth, the popular myth that productivity reduces staff, I think what we found across the board is that in most cases businesses are actually looking to use their skilled staff in other areas of the business and recruit more people, and I think that's been a really encouraging thing about the productivity grants that we've been involved with. Similarly, digital grants, Sheffield has punched above our weight really in terms of the number of businesses. So a third of the businesses in the South Yorkshire programme have accessed that programme. Low carbon, again, as Di said, that's a big programme, and it's one where we have a reserve list now, and we hope that we can find future funding for low carbon grants and audits, because we have been inundated. This is no longer about businesses getting on their low carbon journey, but actually having to reduce carbon to reduce their energy prices, energy costs as much as possible. So this is definitely something that we would absolutely want to continue with in the future.
If I hand over to Alexis now to talk about some of the other issues.
Thank you, Di. Good afternoon, councillors. A few points from me, just reflecting on the challenges that we're facing in the wider economy. So as you'll be aware, during the pandemic we convened a business response group at Pace that worked with the City Council and the Mayoral Combined Authority as grants were distributed to businesses. We've created a subgroup very much off the back of the cost of living issues that have now been experienced in our economy. The membership of that group is comprised of business representatives from the High Street, but also importantly from the banks and also the accountancy firms in the city, so that we can get a broad cross-section of what's going on. Just picking up on the comment that Diana made with regards to the difference between COVID and what we are calling in this country the cost of living crisis. As we all know, there was a huge amount of funding made available by government. That isn't available this time, so we're dealing with something that's quite fundamentally different. There's also a subtle, but one might equally argue profound psychological difference between what we're dealing with now as what we were dealing with in the business community during COVID. I'm fully aware that everybody had a different experience during COVID, but there was a broad understanding of what lockdown was, and it impacted on people across the piece. The cost of living crisis, as it's been experienced by businesses, is different. It's in many ways a fundamentally private experience, in that a bill landing on your business's doorstep is something that you have to manage and think about privately. And it may well be that you do not feel comfortable as a business owner admitting to yourself or to your employees or to your peer group or your supply chain that you can't pay that bill. There is a real emphasis at the moment on recognising, and I think it is important that we recognise this, that the issues that we're facing in the economy now they were in COVID clearly hugely impactful, but there was a wider opportunity to pivot your business, to be able to think about how you could be successful in the economy, whilst many of us either were focused on supporting essential workers, or we were trying to figure out how we can continue our economy whilst huddling at home. The issues that we're seeing in the economy now are far more pervasive, owing to the fact that we all know that the energy prices have increased, but they've increased in a way that a few years ago nobody would have been able to predict. This country today is spending 4 times more on energy than it was a year ago, and that is impacting on every single business, be it on the high street or a professional services company or a manufacturer. And our energy market is not equipped to deal with that change. And so we, as a business response group, have heard some very, very disturbing stories about the fact that there are viable and profitable businesses right now that are having to chew through their cash reserves to genuinely keep the light switched on. And those cash reserves will be exhausted by the end of the financial year. Notwithstanding the fact that it is incredibly challenging, I do want to add that Yvonne is absolutely right. What this is doing, this situation is doing, and it was the same in COVID, is it's bringing the City Council, the Chamber of Commerce and other business organisations together so that we can amplify and broadcast that messaging which can benefit businesses. But also then focusing on the longer term renewal of our economy and making it possible for people to pivot their businesses as they are, but also to create the conditions for more people to start businesses, because however challenging an economy may be, there'll always be people who have bright ideas and smart ideas about how they want to start their own business. There is a wider representation, and as I said, just in summary, it is a polycrisis. The thing that we have to recognise is that, as a group, is that these issues won't disappear or have the granularity as we saw in COVID. We would expect to see energy prices high throughout 2023 and 2024. And so, again, just as a final comment from me, as Diana has said, is that as a Chamber of Commerce, we're certainly very realistic about saying to businesses, hopefully without being at all considered heartless, but there's only so much any of us can do when the global economy is being turned upside down by some truly once in a few decades issues.
Chair, I think at this point we can take some questions on the cost of living items, and then if we need to go into some of the future funding elements that are in the report, we could go through those in a bit more detail. Is that okay?
That's a good idea. Thank you for that. Colleagues, any questions at this point? I'll look to this side of the chamber if you want the first question. Councillor Milson.
Thank you, Chair. Is it right to ask about the low carbon project in this section of the report? You haven't really touched on it, but it sort of relates to the cost of living, obviously. There are some figures on page 55 in the report here that they're just figures that they're sort of just numbers of businesses and numbers of tonnes of reduction. Just wondered where they sit on any kind of targets or ambitions that might have been set, and that 802 tonnes of annual carbon reduction, is that a good figure? Where does that sit in a target? And also just thinking about the continuation of that project when that round of funding ends, and I understand that the next round of funding is not yet substantiated. So what continuity can there be for carrying that project over and ensuring that we don't lose momentum in that, and in fact we can gain momentum in helping businesses to reduce their carbon output and save their costs?
Yes, so the outputs for that programme were put together at a time before the energy crisis, and for a programme itself, it has delivered the outputs in the ERDF contract. Going forward, we will relook at all of those actually and the way that that's delivered. There are issues around supply, for example, so solar panels are often a solution for many businesses that come out in audit, and I just think that we are in a process now where we need to work with regional partners to look at that programme going forward and what that would look like for businesses. It's the expertise that businesses are crying for, I think, in the main, and yes, businesses do need access to grants because they too are struggling to get their hands on ready cash, but at the same time they need to know what to target first, and I think that needs to be in our minds really as we develop a future programme. We have proposed to SYMCA, to SYMCA, that we look at the gap that we've got between now and the next financial year with SPF funding, and have proposed that we target a funding proposal for more low carbon projects to pick up the reserve list of businesses, and we're just working through that process with them at the moment. So I can't say any more than that at the moment, just that we are absolutely trying to get that so we don't have that drop off.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Councillor Masters.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, a word of praise for the Business Information Officer, because, I mean, many businesses in my area have really valued the support given to them by him, and I've been working with him, so I know how much he puts into that. But my question is I'm really pleased about the activities funded through economic recovery, and you've said footfall increases. How does that translate into spend economic activity? Because we've got figures for big events like tram lines and the women's football, but these smaller events, have you got figures for that? Because football is not quite the same as, you know.
Nationally, if you look at the information that's available through, for instance, the High Streets Task Force, the multiplier effect of events isn't always immediate. So depending on the type of event might have an immediate impact on the businesses that are immediately adjacent to the performance area, for instance. But what they tend to do is to raise awareness of the range of retail and non-retail businesses that there are in an area, and that then tends to pass by word of mouth to friends and relations. So the multiplier effect of the events that have been sponsored by the ERF will be much longer term than the immediate impact of something, say, like the food festival, which has its own built-in multiplier for that particular weekend and isn't capable of pulling together the spend, for instance, with the local businesses that might take part in that event as to what their sales figures might be, say, in the run-up to Christmas, that result directly from participation in the food festival. So the ERF activity difference is really that the multiplier tends to be gentler and longer term. And really what we are helping the businesses in the ERF project areas to do is to maximise that long-term impact, so that there is a knock-on effect that can be valued and assessed by them in a way that makes sense to their business.
Yeah, thank you. I think I needed that reassurance that it's not just a short-term hit, it is a long-term strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Perek.
Thanks, Chair. I've got some questions specifically about the equalities impact assessment. Is this the right time to take this? Or, yeah. I mean, just in general, so the report in Agenda Item 10 and next Agenda Item, it recognises that we haven't consulted a diverse enough range of businesses. It says that BAME business owners speak of turning to their own networks for advice and support. I'm really worried that the equalities impact assessment we have here could replicate some of those same issues. So just each protected characteristic. We don't get specifics about how those groups have been considered or will be engaged, just general statements about how the cost of living crisis disproportionately affects those groups. So as an example on race, because we have the Race Equality Commission report next, the EIA in this says that BAME communities will benefit from participation pathways to being economically active, and inclusive business support will be delivered across all of our communities. Whereas, the Race Equality Commission report spoke to a need to change our culture as an organisation, meeting people where they are, being led by non-white knowledge and expertise, having aspirational targets to engage with BAME-led businesses. I guess I just have a general worry about the lack of specificity in this EIA, for how, if we're planning to build equity across all of our diverse communities, I don't think this says how we're going to do that. And I worry it could replicate some of the issues we're then trying to unpick in the next agenda item. Yeah.
Just to come in on that, the recommendations in this report are mainly information around noting some of these things that we're hearing. So I'll bring in Yvonne to kind of add some flesh to the bones on what we're hearing from those communities of interest as well. They're not detailed in the report or the IA, so absolutely acknowledge that. I think the two are here together on purpose as well, because what we're saying is, okay, this is how things feel at the moment, and this is how we're going to do things differently going forward. So we can talk about it now or in the next report, but in terms of how we're trying to design programmes going forward, who we're listening to and how we're designing them definitely is reflecting a more diverse set of voices. I do think there's a journey to that, and I'm not saying we're at the end of that journey yet, but we're definitely pointed in the right direction, I think. But the EIA for this wasn't designed to kind of test. We're not adopting a policy at this point, so we've not done that detailed impact analysis. It was more around information. but we can spend a bit of time talking about some of those impacts now from Esther and Yvonne. Should we do that? Yeah.
I think data is an issue, and it's a journey that we're going on in Business Sheffield, and I feel like the support that we're providing, for example, on the high street is exemplary, and we are working with you know, all our different business bases and different demographics of businesses. Our data doesn't necessarily reflect that. We're going on a journey where we need to ensure that that's absolutely locked down, and we are, you know, highlighting the businesses that we're working with properly, and then actually ensuring that that goes through the whole of Business Sheffield and the whole of our activity. So we will get to a point, like the recommendations, to ensure that we don't just, you know, categorise BAME businesses, for example, but we look at all different ethnicities and ensure that we are working with, you know, the full demographic of businesses across the board. And we are at the start, or we're on the journey of that. But I firmly believe that what we are doing is right and will get us to that point. Absolutely, Esther. I don't know if you want to say.
Yeah, I can give a case study example of why I was late. 3 Kurdish businesses in Spittal Hill. I have a sort of, people are used to my face now, so if they know I'm on the street, somebody is sent down the road to get me to discuss something. What I have noticed in the 2 years nearly that I've been working as a contractor with Business Sheffield is how much more understanding the wider organisation is of, you can't call it racism because it's not designed that way, but the systematic flaws that are a barrier to integration of BME businesses into the wider support packages that Business Sheffield provide. And as that awareness rises, the strategies come into place. So whilst as advisors we are all unfortunately, we are all white. None of us, with the exception, we have one Mandarin speaker, but none of us speak a language other than English. This is a problem in terms of being able to locally deliver programs ourselves. But because of the nature of the relationships that we built up with the business owners on our individual high streets, most of us who have a lot of work done with ethnic minority businesses have an informal network of translators that we can call on in emergencies. So whilst it might be rather ad hoc, when we were going around to businesses and helping them to apply for the COVID grants, for instance, there is an expression on people's face where you can tell that they know you're there to help them, but they haven't a clue what it is that you're trying to say. And I could just stick my head out of the door and yell, I need a translator, and somebody would come and help me because they understand that our role is to support the businesses to get the best out of the council and out of Business Sheffield that we can. Equality impact assessments serve a lot of positive purposes, but they don't always give you the facility for describing the actions that individual officers are taking and how systems are changing in response to that sort of groundswell of feedback that the council now has from the team.
Thank you, I'm just mindful of time and we've still got 2 weighty items to get through, so yeah.
Thank you, that's really helpful to, I guess, yeah, I wanted to raise it because I think it is an issue with the report, and I completely accept that it maybe doesn't match up on the ground, but I do just think if this is something we are committed to at an institutional wide level, I think we should be explicit on what we are doing, how we're trying to unpick our culture. So, yeah, helpful to hear the specific examples. And
we would love a team of translators.
I think that's a benefit of, yeah.
I'll take that feedback.
There'll be time for questions at the end. Shall we move on to the second part you wanted to do, Diana?
Okay, yeah, we've just got a couple of slides to talk through some of the recommendation in here around future funding. So I'll hand over to Yvonne to do that, and then we can make the decision.
Small writing, that's entirely my fault, I apologise. So we are working with regional partners at the moment, SYMCA and the 2 universities and all 4 local authorities to develop programmes and priorities for future funding. Shared Prosperity Fund for business support is only £14 million across South Yorkshire, which is, you know, much smaller than ERDF. What is encouraging is the conversations that we are having with partners is around priorities for, you know, true economic development and business support going forward that actually, hopefully, will target not just SPF funding, but gain share funding and other funds as well. So that's the journey that we're on at the minute. It is slightly slower than we would have hoped by now to kind of get to kind of budgets and things like that, but it feels like it's the right strategic thing to do with the right regional partners in the room to go away then and develop priorities around all areas that will not just kind of, you know, do both an inclusive business support, but also link to acceleration and research and development assets within universities as well. So for the first time, it does feel like we have got all the right organisations in the room to kind of make that happen, really. On the next slide, this has happened literally in the last week, where we have identified priority leads for different funding areas. And over the next few weeks before the Christmas break, we'll be developing these further through the leads and inviting people into those working groups to ensure that you know, they're developed and they are inclusive as well. So I just wanted to kind of get that across, that this is more than just SPF, but actually the future of business support, really. Thank you.
So in the report itself, there's two funding streams that we're talking about. One is a cost of living fund that the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority are talking about. These things aren't real yet. They're just the same as SPF. We're still waiting for the money to drop. So this report is about our preparation for when it does drop, to be able to put kind of bids in. So the report talks about focusing on two key areas for the cost of living grants that might come through the MCA to extend the productivity grants and the low carbon support project, whilst there's that dip we've talked about. And then the report also talks about some of the work that we've been doing on SPF to identify interventions. Shared Prosperity Fund this year is year one, so when the money drops, the likelihood is that we would have to get it out the door by March. So our proposal is for year one in business support to continue to support the business information officers, and we can actually charge this full year to Shared Prosperity Fund and then use the funding that we have got for the council to extend it to next year. So the proposal is to continue with the business information officers and then continue to do the collaborative work that Yvonne talked about to design this year 2 and 3 business support programmes around startup activity, specialist advice, grants and toolkits which are focused around low carbon, productivity and digital, and then looking at kind of innovation and talent programmes as well. So this report is asking the committee to note and endorse that approach, that we're getting some of these priorities ready for when the funding drops. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Before I open it out to questions, just a personal observation. That's a cracking list of priorities and help available to businesses. It really is. So any questions on this bit? I've got Councillor Crossland and then Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reports and all the feedback from everybody. It's good to hear. So the purpose of the report states that this will also set out new activity. But reading the report, I'm seeing a lot about what we've already done and things we've already agreed, and not many new initiatives coming up, like we saw the productivity and the digital grants in the slides, and they sound fantastic. And it's okay us having the funding streams, but what are we going to do with those funding streams when we get them, and how are we going to put them into action? Particularly, I think, with professional services in the city, because supporting high streets is good for 2022 and 2023, but what about 2032 and 2033? We need to help the professional services survive now so they can thrive in 10 years' time, really. And as a committee, we've previously heard that that's the section of the economy that we really need to get moving to help us compete with places like Leeds and Manchester, and to help Sheffield become the top of the core cities, not just a middling core city.
So pages 56 to kind of 59 detail some of the future focused work, but as we were explaining, some of these funding mechanisms haven't fully come to light as yet. So what we're doing is developing those programmes now. So we're looking to extend what we're currently doing and improve it and innovate it. Some we're trying to develop new programmes. We haven't got those fully fledged programmes yet. We actually don't know some of the eligibility around the funding as yet. So what this report is doing is flagging the direction of travel, and we will get kind of fully developed programmes that can come back to the committee for endorsement as we get there. So it is on the work plan again for February. So we just wanted to flag that we are waiting for this funding to come, but if we wait until all of the information's there to start this work around creating the programmes, there won't be enough time. So this is kind of signalling intent, I suppose, and the areas of focus to give early sight to the committee for challenge and support.
Councillor Turpin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for coming to see us, Alexis and Esther. It's always a pleasure to see you, Alexis, although it was a pretty depressing message you brought for us today. And yeah, nice to meet you in person, Esther. I've heard some wonderful things about you. The business information officers are all excellent. Dan Wilkinson works in my area and he's brilliant too. I just wanted to, I guess, make a little request. I really strongly feel that the cost of living crisis could have been largely avoided had we dealt with the climate emergency over the last 20, 30 years. And you know, we've basically been governed by climate change deniers, free marketeers, people who would rather leave the EU, whatever the cost. And here we are now, whereas if we'd have been insulating our homes, creating low energy buildings, generating our own clean energy, growing our own food, you know, that's the answer to the cost of living crisis. And I totally accept that, you know, it's a bit late. But I guess what I would just like to request is that when we do invest money, that it has an ongoing effect. And you know, I can see the value in giving someone a small grant as a sticking plaster that might delay the inevitable by 6 months. But I would just really like to see that the money we invest will have an impact next year and the year after and so on as well. And you know, let's really try and get as much bang for those bucks as we can.
I'm happy to kind of comment on that, and I think this report reflects that. So there aren't grants that we can give to businesses to pay their energy bills right now. So our focus is absolutely on working with them through programmes like the Low Carbon Business Programme to look at how they're using energy, to help them reduce their overall bills and to move on that journey a lot quicker. We do need some more resources to be able to do that, and I think it's again that collective messaging, the chamber that Alexis was talking about, coming together and all saying the same things and promoting activity in this area is really key when we're facing working with businesses. So I think we're at the start of that journey and happy to accelerate it, and we're just trying to win the funding in that space, I think. But certainly I agree, trying to invest in changes for businesses that make them resilient over the longer term is absolutely part of the strategy. Did you want to say anything else, Alexis?
I think one of the most important things that we're going to have to do as a city is what we're doing, which is the focus, and we've already mentioned it this afternoon, the city goals work to be able to craft and focus in on the deep systemic change that we will need to see in our economy, which we can do, which we absolutely can do. I'm very struck, Councillor, you're right, I've arrived with a rather depressing description of what's going on in the economy, but equally it does provide us with a catalyst to think differently. One of the things that was written into the business recovery plan during the pandemic and has become arguably even more important in intervening years is that when we look at the data as a city, we rank bottom of the pile for startup rate, is that we can do a lot more to be able to help people start businesses. And those businesses may well be in sectors of the economy we're yet to invent. And that's why the programmes that I've heard sat here as a guest are really important. Is about creating that deep systemic change that can drive our economy forward, and to have the economy embedded in our city goals work. So that's the only thing I would say. Deep systemic change.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hunt next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentations today. It's really helpful. So I think what we've got in front of us here is a report that sets out help that is available now, and it's clear that there isn't enough of that available. And I think, you know, standout line, page 1.3.2, there are no government grants for businesses during this economic crisis, and the tools that the council has available to support businesses will not be enough to prevent some businesses closing without further government intervention. I think we're all agreed that the government needs to step up and provide help in the short term. But what is also clear from this report is that it's within it are the seeds of that long-term, you might call it an industrial strategy for Sheffield, a proper economic development plan where we're looking not just about what businesses need right now for the next 3 to 4 months, but 3 to 4 years into the 2030s. And I think, you know, whilst we need a business recovery plan clearly this winter, it would be a mistake if it was couched solely in terms of the cost of living crisis in its current terms for this winter. It needs to be properly understood and connected up to our skills strategy for the city, our low carbon strategy, what new sectors are we identifying, so that pivot that's been talked about isn't a pivot just to get people through the winter, it's a pivot to the long-term future. And, you know, I think the point that's just been made there about properly embedding this in the city goals strategy so that we're looking into the next decade is absolutely right. And here within this report, I definitely see the beginnings of that. And that's something that I think this committee needs to take forward kind of writ large through the work plan and into the next few years.
Councillor Milsom next, then we'll go to Councillor Masters, then we'll finish with Councillor Perrett because I am mindful of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. We're going from the big picture back down to the small picture, I'm afraid. I did want to just pick up on the work that the business information officers do, which sounds brilliant. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of quite how sort of comprehensive that is. So it's really good to see some of that in the report. And I was just wondering whether you work with the local area committees and how that ties in. And I understand that each local area committee has someone an officer tasked with building up local business forums, and how does that all tie in together? We don't need to go into a lot of detail, but I'd be really interested to learn more about that, perhaps if I could talk with you afterwards about it. And also on a very local front as well, it would be really good to hear some of the results of your work in our local high streets and district centres. I'd be really interested to see, I don't know if you produce any sort of periodic reports on that, but I'd be really interested to see some figures and outcomes for my own ward, and to understand a bit more what the challenges are that you see and you work with, and where the success stories are as well. That would be really useful. Thank you.
Yes, so I think a couple of things really. We do have data of businesses that we're working with, and that is down to high street level as well. I think what would be really helpful is for an information officer to come out with you in your area. I think that works really well. We do work really closely with the local area committees as well, and the people you know, that are tasked in each area. And I think part of our role is actually highlighting some of the issues that businesses are facing and working with them, you know, to represent those issues in a community setting as well. And we continue to do that work. Business forums are not that easy generally to do. So actually a real outcome of this business information officer work would be to have really active business forums, I think. And I just think some areas are closer to that at the moment than perhaps others, and I think it's our job really to encourage and help businesses to get to that state where they can actively work together for, you know, for the benefits of all the businesses on their high street. Really, it's, you know, it's early days, but I think we are seeing some of that now on some high streets.
Yeah, do you want to say something?
The interesting sort of thing that we've seen in terms of the ERF is that the business forums currently work best in areas where there are sufficient people willing to lead and who have what I would call sort of local authority style administration skills. So understanding the need for, say, minute taking, sharing information back to members, making sure that everybody gets a good lead time notice of meetings, that makes a big difference. You get an area like Burngreave where we have businesses that keep much longer opening hours than would be seen in white areas. You've got multiple languages. You've got cultural impacts of different ways of organising, not necessarily always being in the habit of working through faith groups, so that you don't start with the active support of the imams, for instance. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get that "we're okay" message across. Working with different sort of technologies helps, but it's not just to sort of set up a business group, a business forum, so that people can come together and discuss their needs. Sometimes it's more a question of helping them to understand where their own autonomy lies and what is the responsibility that they have for their own neighbourhoods and what is the responsibility for the council. And that message is not always easy to get across when you get businesses that have been run by people who are first generation, for instance, in this country, who don't have experience of having systems in their home countries, that therefore they know where to look for the equivalent information here. If we think about business refuse collection as an obvious example, if you come from a country where there isn't that concept of contracted business waste, you wouldn't necessarily start up a business in this country actively looking for who is my business waste contractor. So then you might end up in a situation where you get penalised because you didn't know the thing existed in the first place. And that's getting back to Councillor Parek's comments about equality, and the role that the information officers can have for the wider council is helping businesses understand what it is that they need to access in order to run a business in line with UK legislation and standards.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can do any further briefing outside of the committee if you like.
So I've got two more questions. If the questions and the answers could be as brief as possible, we do have two quite weighty things still yet to do. Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, really, it's a plea. I mean, on page 66, you've got sort of, visitor numbers trying to encourage visitors to Sheffield. You just mentioned culture. And we have a huge, important heritage base. To me, heritage and culture go together. Our current culture is going to be the heritage of the future generations. Why aren't we capitalising on the, what we've got in the heritage line? And please, sort of, can that be considered? Is all I'm asking for. Thank you.
Anybody got anything to add to that?
Accept the plea. I think capacity is one of the main issues there, I think, within the council in terms of acting as a convener around heritage in the way that we are doing with culture at the moment. But it's certainly something that I'm looking into as well, and definitely see the linkages between culture and heritage and how powerful they are for an economic catalyst. So we are working with joined up heritage, but there's more we can do.
Mine's also potentially a comment as well, so I'll try and keep it short. Just continuing on from Tom's point about, what priorities we should be setting for our future economy. That's a reference to the Mayoral Combined Authority's Tech Welcome Grants, which I know Barnsley's listed as leading on digital grants, but I do think the digital economy and building a green and digital future should be a priority for us as well. So last Thursday I attended the South Yorkshire Tech Summit in Barnsley, which was really positive, and there was a real consensus from local digital firms about putting fairness and equity front and centre in their work, talking about building a place-based digital economy. I think there's a lot we can build on from that, and a lot we can I think we should be digging our teeth into. I think it's really welcome that Oliver Carpard's introduced the welcome grants to bring new tech businesses into the region. And I think something our committee should be thinking about in the longer term is how we can build on this, go beyond attracting firms to retaining them, and building a tech sector that reflects Sheffield's values rather than Silicon Valley's as well. I think that's something we can really add a Sheffield stamp on. So but I think something we should be prioritising.
Thank you. And yeah, Yvonne has actually been in detailed work on the Tech Welcome Grants as a subgroup, as always is the case. The workers behind the scenes have done a lot of the work, so we totally agree with everything you've just said. And also, Tom, thank you for the points that you made and really agree with that. On the back of the City Goals work, we want to be producing a city investment plan, and that's exactly where we would see that. I think you called it a proper economic development plan. So the City Goals will lead, and then we'll pull from that a proper economic development plan. So we are in a bit of an interim where we're dealing with crisis and pointing to the future, but we've got that roadmap in our sights. But thank you for those points.
Thank you, guys. Can I just wrap up by saying, yeah, we're living in very turbulent and incredibly difficult times, but it's really heartening to see such a wide range of help being offered and advice, both from council officers and partner organisations in Sheffield. And it's as someone that used to run a business, truly appreciated. So thank you very much. As a committee, we have to move on to the recommendations, which are that the committee notes the progress made in delivering the business recovery plan so far, notes the effect of the cost of living crisis on the business base and the council's response, and finally endorses the council's priority for the SPF business support programme. So those are the recommendations, colleagues. Are we all agreed? Does anybody disagree? If not, that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you to officers and everyone else that's here today. Thank you. With that, we move on to item number 10, which is the Race Equality Commission and the business growth responses. I believe that's Yvonne Diner again.
Thank you. And we're bringing this report on the back of recommendation from yourselves to kind of see a progress update on where we are in terms of delivering against some of those the REC recommendations. I just wanted to kind of say that this is definitely a work in progress. Actually, the work started on this during COVID, when our eyes were kind of opened to the fact that we're quite centralised in the way we deliver services, and started to work differently. And one of the things I'm learning on this is the more you do differently, the more you see you can do differently, if that makes sense, because you start to talk to new people and see different things. So it's definitely a journey that we're on. But actually, it's since the hearing itself, and Yvonne and I personally presented to the REC hearing, that we've started some of this work. So a lot of the things that you'll see in here, we didn't wait for the recommendations. So I'll probably want to say that we are on a journey. I don't think this is by any means the end point. We are just talking to you about the progress that we've made so far. So I wouldn't be saying that this is our complete response to the REC recommendations. I think it'll be an ongoing journey. But the report, I think, gives you a good sense of the changes that we are making, our intent and the collaboration that we're putting together to deliver against that. So Yvonne's got a few slides and case studies to talk through, and we've got Tracy from the Chamber of Commerce. In the REC report, it talks to the Chamber of Commerce as well as the Council and the MCA actually around these recommendations. So we thought it would be useful to invite Tracy today so you can see some of the wider picture of the business changes. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I think, like Di said, really, the key thing for us is learning that prior to COVID, we were a very centric business support model where we expected or we sort of promoted our services and then expected businesses to come to us. It became very clear during COVID that that actually doesn't happen, despite the fact that our ethnicity data, reflected quite well just as a data set. So we are building on the work that we've had on the high streets into our wider business support programme. We have actively engaged with businesses and business owners from different ethnicities who are now acting as critical friends in Business Sheffield to really help us understand how to better support businesses and where to put that support rather than expecting people to come to us. So we've delivered quite a lot of activity now and piloted activity with different community groups and with different ethnicity groups that come together and meet. And we are continuing to do that, and that will basically impact on our business support going forward and take our business support out from a town hall delivery model into local communities and directly with businesses. We are on the start of that journey, but I think we're having really good conversations, and part of one of the recommendations of the REC was around accessing investment. We've had a number of conversations, as have the Chamber with British Business Bank, about opening up investment and opportunities to start-up businesses from black businesses. And we are working also with Lloyds Bank as well about how we can get businesses to access not only their finance actually, but mentors that they have available and open bank accounts with Lloyds Bank as well. So we are on the start of the journey, but I think you know, it's the right journey, and I do think that there are lots and lots of positive things happening that we need to build on and ensure that work actually then is included in the funding conversations that we're having going forward for SBF and other funds. So just really quickly from a Business Sheffield perspective, this is just one example of one of those pilot activities that we did with United Women's Affiliation Group. So first generation immigrants, all from different places actually in Africa. They're now at 70 members. It's a voluntary organisation with a growing number of members. We took our support, took our advisors out to that organisation and listened to them, you know, rather than just kind of give them our kind of toolkit that they can access, but actually listen to the support that they needed. They all, many of them have been running businesses in their own countries, and actually what we're trying to do now is to help them to get the skills that they need to deliver those businesses in this country, in Sheffield as well, and we continue to support that group, both individually and as a group as well, and link them into our employment and skills team as well on specific training requirements that they have around English, counselling sessions, counselling training and mentoring training and digital training as well. So it's just an example of the kinds of things that we're doing and trying to build on, really. The next slide is Tracy's slide around Chamber Council.
This might be a strange thing because it's actually a little bit internal to the Chamber, but we've actually think we are representative of of businesses. So if we don't look the part and are saying what we should be doing in this space, then I don't think people will trust us in the same way. So we've done some work, some of our initial work that we've taken up since the report is how do we actually recruit amongst our members the right people to be our representative council, so that we do properly reflect not just across the business sectors but across the diversity in the city as well. So we've actually changed how we do the recruitment process. It has been more inclusive. We've had more people apply from the black and ethnic minority groups, which has actually resulted in our latest intake. There's 30 people on council normally, so they rotate and we do 10 a year approximately, but in the latest intake of 8 there were further 2 people of colour, which has actually given us a much better balance around the room, and we've also changed the market sectors that we're looking at. So we've actually got people from the digital sector, so we know we need to be more away from manufacturing and just services. So we're looking at the whole cross-section and trying to balance that with diversity and colour as well as representing the city's industries. It's quite a balancing act, but our nominations committee worked really hard on that. And one of the other things is that the council are the feeder to our board of directors. So that way, if we've actually got that diversity from that group, we've then got a better chance of the director group being even more diverse as they progress on, if that's the route they want to take to be the non-execs. So we're beginning, like Yvonne says, it's a journey and we're part way through it, but that's just one of the small bits. And on top of that, we're being much more aware of any of our events that we're having for members. We run a drop-in networking quite regularly now, but we've actually decided we're looking at the timings of them. We're looking at the venues of them, so that it's not always around being able to have a beer or being drinking or what locations they are. We now have one in the morning that's at Blend Kitchen, so there isn't that whole issue around somebody not wanting to attend certain venues. And we're trying to be much more open about that. So we're doing quite a lot of outdoor things in parks as well for next year. And it's how we try and spread that. And that's just a small bit of what we're doing from the internal. But externally, we're approaching our members more and looking for who do we need to talk to in your local area that you actually think isn't being included, that maybe you want to engage with, and how do we approach that as well. So there's some more examples in the written report on that. I'm happy to take questions if that's appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Just the, yeah, it is, yeah, just the final slide really, and the lot of this is detailed in the report. So each of the actions around an equal and enterprising kind of city are outlined in the report with some interventions that we've done against them. The main kind of decision that we're wanting the committee to consider today is around actually action 4, which is looking at governing bodies and city partnerships. And to propose that we start up a new Sheffield Advisory Business Board. And the reason for that, and I'll give you a personal reflection. So as we were presenting to kind of the Rec Commission and analysing our services, there was a really good report from the Federation of Small Businesses called Unlocking Opportunity. And it was talking about actually the products, the toolkit that we've just been talking about actually, who's designing that? And often it's local authorities, universities, and we then consult with business groups. But even if you look at the business response group that we pulled together, it's made up of representative organisations, and they tend to be white male, and a lot of times they're in those positions. And so it was a real eye-opener that actually where we're making policy, where we're designing products, we're not inclusive. And so then when it comes to kind of promoting those toolkits and that business support to actual communities, there might be a mismatch already inbuilt in the system. So the recommendation in this report around this new Sheffield Business Board is about moving away from just talking to representative organisations, but actually getting businesses, a diverse set of businesses that look at different sectors and different ethnicities around the table to advise and to be consulted with when we're making policy and kind of project toolkit decisions, so that we can embed a different voice, more inclusive voices up front in our thinking, rather than at the back end when we're trying to kind of distribute some of this information to communities. So I think that's the main, so it's an update on where we're going, and I'd really welcome your comments and ideas around that, but that's the key decision today, to endorse that approach to move to a new inclusive business board. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Colleagues, any questions? Councillor Masters?
Sorry about this, I'm talking a lot today, but really, going through the report, it's very top down, and I'm starting at the bottom. So I've itemised what I want to say to stop the previous rambling on. Reading through the report, I'm concerned the emphasis is only on opening up our business space to support existing and start-up businesses. Nothing is mentioned of developing their customer base. Where in the report does it say efforts are made to ensure that businesses are recognised as being available to the wider community, not just BAME community from which they emerge? Some businesses will be BAME specific, but if we are to be inclusive, efforts must be made to ensure people across the city and beyond know they are welcome regardless of their ethnicity. Anyone from the BAME community who has worked in an all-white environment, or a woman working in an all-male environment, will probably appreciate exactly what I mean. So what support can also be offered to all the businesses and staff to ensure they are seen as inclusive of the wider community? And I'm hoping that's, you know, my concerns are clear. Thank you.
Can I just talk about the training we've just done as the Chamber, which is referred to in the report? We've had 2 sessions on race equity, and one of the first sessions was actually around language and how adopting the right language and some of the words we use and starting right at very basics and how we be inclusive right down to it. It isn't necessarily just job adverts, it's within an office as well, and how it's actually within an organisation, so you're then recruiting the right people, and it's then how you attract people into your business around that. And we shared that across, at the moment, our board and our council and some of our patrons, and we're wanting to try and encourage, we're looking to where actually that training be available to businesses in our membership, so they can actually start looking at it, so they are actually, it goes wider, and we actually approach everybody in the city then has access to that sort of information, but it's going to take time for everybody to understand how all that works.
It's not quite what I meant. I'm talking about if I want to sort of access a business and I can look at, say, a shop window and I think, oh, that's not for me. It's obviously, I mean, I'm thinking of fabrics. I love some of the fabrics I've seen, but I'm thinking sort of all the talk about cultural appropriation. You can't wear things like that. You can't use that. It belongs to. It's getting over those sorts of barriers so that anybody on the street can look at something and think, oh, that's interesting, I'll go. Or anybody can go into a business and think that sort of they will provide me with the service I require, whether it's legal or otherwise, regardless of sort of, you know, sort of the name, the ethnic makeup, ethnicity, or anything. I want that level, and I think that training needs to start much lower down. The businesses have got enough on to keep the businesses thriving and to make them accessible to anybody in Sheffield, regardless of, you know, what's going on. And that's where I'm coming from.
Thank you, yeah, and the report is silent on that. There is an action around working with businesses to sign up to Businesses in the Community Race at Work Charter or the Race Equality Code. I think that's an area that we haven't started to progress as quickly as we could, and potentially some of the things that you're suggesting might be within there, where we're working with the businesses themselves to act and change the way that they're doing things so they're more welcoming to their staff and their customer base. So I think that might be where we start to unpick some of that. We haven't done a lot of that at the moment, and so I can't right now say how we would do it, but it's an area we can certainly start to look into and pull partners into that discussion of how best to do it. So thank you for the point.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Milsom, then Councillor Hunt, and then I might have a question myself.
Thank you, Chair. Very quick, really, and simple. Who would have ownership of this new Sheffield Advisory Board? Is that Business Sheffield or in partnership with the Chamber? Or I didn't quite pick that up from the report. And to whom will it be accountable? And who would have oversight of performance and assurance going forward that it's going to keep fulfilling its purpose?
We haven't fully designed all of that yet. Our assumption, what we'd like to do, is to work with the Chamber and with the Council, so it would feed directly into this committee as an advisory board. It would also include feeding into kind of the City Goals work, for example, and into the Chamber board. But what we want to do first is do a bit of listening, and kind of it might want to be feeding into the MCA as well, and we might need another partner to come into us. Just having the council and the chamber as kind of co-bodies organising that might not send the right message. So I think this is an intent of what we want to do. Usually we would have written the terms of reference and attached it to this document to get the decision today. But if we do that, that means me and Yvonne are writing it, and we haven't done the proper consultation and worked differently to get the right terms of reference and how's it going to work. So I suppose why the report says we'll come back in February with a full proposal around this is that we want to take the time to do it properly, go and talk to the businesses who we want round the table, find out how it needs to look and feel to get them round the table, not assume that, you know, set up like this will be inclusive to everybody, because it won't. So happy to have any ideas and conversations around that. Our assumption is it will feed into the Chamber and the Council, but there might be more than that as we go into the detail.
Thank I might take Chair's prerogative here, because what I was going to say was very similar to Councillor Milsom. It's just we're creating, or we're looking at creating another board, and with the papers we all receive, there are advisory groups here, advisory groups there, and I was just going to comment that we need to be very clear about what the terms of reference are, and if there's overlap with other groups, we're not just creating more groups for the sake of it, but I'm sure you'll be on top of that. Councillor Hunt, and then we'll finish with Councillor Perec.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks again for the presentations. I think I welcome the recommendation for the creation of the new advisory board, and also the approach that will be taken to develop that. That makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to come back to something that Diana said a minute ago about how the work to encourage businesses to sign up to the Business in the Community Race at Work Charter hasn't yet sort of properly got off the ground. I think one way that perhaps could be kick-started is by Sheffield City Council signing up to that. As of November 2022, on the Business in the Community Race at Work Charter website, there are about 25 councils signed up to it, including core cities like Birmingham and Nottingham, but Sheffield isn't. And it seems like a bit of an oversight because many of the points in the charter are things that the council is already well on the way to doing as a result of the Race Equality Commission. So I think that might be a good way to encourage other businesses to sign up if we ourselves as an organisation are signed up. But I support everything in here.
Great point. I think a report's going to Strategy and Resources actually on the 5th of December, so I'll speak to my colleagues about that potentially being a recommendation in there.
It's not currently in there.
Sorry to interrupt again. I've just been advised that with this item to finish and then the budget discussion to come, we're not going to finish at 5. So the rules say I have to ask for a formal agreement to extend the meeting by up to half an hour. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay, thank you very much. And with that, Councillor Perec.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, to echo everyone else, thank you so much for bringing this. Completely agree with the recommendations. I mean, sitting on this committee, which also has majority white men, I can completely see the need to diversify all boards that to make sure they're representative of our own communities. I just had a couple of two quick questions about other recommendations actually from the REC report, and which I think relate to us. Are we going to get a different paper about the culture recommendations? And then I think there's a separate few which probably more relate to finance, but they're about, you know, procurement for BAME-led businesses, and I think they're worth us looking at ourselves, maybe in the city goals development as well. But
in terms of the culture one, we did mention some of those in the culture report that came in September, and we'll be looking to develop those into the new cultural strategy. And action is being taken, which is being fed into the report to SNR on the 5th. So yeah, it feels a bit fragmented. This was just around the business ones that we were asked to come in kind of first. We can bring the cultural ones separately, but they are being kind of developed. So I'm happy to share those with the full committee outside of this room. In terms of the procurement ones, if you highlight to me which ones particularly, I'll work with the procurement colleagues on those as well. I'm sure they're taking them forward too. Thanks.
So, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. We move on to the recommendations, which are that the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee notes progress of Business Sheffield in meeting the recommendations and actions of the Race Equality Commission final report dated July 2022. 2. Endorses a proposal to develop a new Sheffield Business Board, which is representative of the city's diverse business base. The board will be developed with other business-facing services of the council and in collaboration with the Sheffield Chamber. And 3, instructs that, once developed, the proposed terms of reference for the new Sheffield Business Board be brought back to the committee for consideration and further recommendations as appropriate. So those are the recommendations, colleagues. Are we agreed on that? Does anybody disagree? In which case that's carried unanimously, and can I thank you for bringing it to us and all the work that's been going on in the background to get it to this point. Thank you very much. So, next up we have agenda item 11, which is the month 6 monitoring of the financial position. Ryan's here, so over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. What you've got in front of you is the month 6 monitoring position, which summarises the overall council position and a little bit specifically to this committee. Members will note from the report the council is looking at an £18.6 million overspend as at the end of month 6. As time's moved on since this report, the month 7 overspend is almost exactly the same as that, so there have been no material changes from month to month. Month 6 is an improvement on the previous month, but obviously still a significant overspend. Much of the monitoring report repeats discussions that we've had at this committee and elsewhere already. It's a year-to-date report, so it inevitably covers old ground in many respects because the reasons for overspends have not really changed since the start of this year. It's really down to relatively late starting of delivery of budget implementation plans and savings programmes for this year. And just to reassure the committee, we've started work already at looking at how we can ensure better delivery of budget implementation plans for next year. And proposals on that will be coming forward to Strategy and Resources Committee for approval as soon as we're able to do that. In terms of this committee specifically, broadly speaking on budget, and nothing for me really to bring to your attention. So with that, Chair, I'll happily take questions that members have on any aspect of that particular report.
Okay, we've got Councillor Crossan.
Thank you, Chair. So the report says that we've got £16.7 million in reserves. What happens if we run out of reserves?
So, about 12 months ago, the council decided, or we decided to recommend to council ultimately, that £70 million of reserves were used or available for use to manage the council's financial position and to give the council time and space to return to a financially sustainable position. So, post-pandemic, some expenditure in some areas was running significantly higher than it had done pre-pandemic, and we needed a bit of time and space to get the council's finances back on track. We undertook a review of reserves, and at that time £70 million was earmarked to use to manage the council's budget risk. We used 20 million of those reserves to balance last year's overspend. We used 15 to set a balanced budget this year, and we earmarked 25 million of reserves to manage the timing and delivery risks of this year's budgets, and it's that 25 million that we are now 18.6 million into, according to this report. So overall, you're right, we've got about 16 million of those reserves left. That is not the entirety of the council's reserves by any stretch. The council's total earmarked reserves are around £300 million. Now that includes some money that isn't really the council's to use or spend. For example, the timing differences in the way that the government pays PFI credits to the council and the timing then when we pay it out to the service providers. That creates a reserve because government pays up front for a lot of these things. Cash flow, exactly right. Another reserve that we really don't want to touch, for example, we have a reserve to cover our insurance position in the event that we have significant claims against the council for whatever reason, or we need to cover risks such as flooding. All of that is separate and detached from the reserves that we speak about here. So, whilst we are getting through the reserves that we put on one side to manage our financial position, we still are in a very strong position overall as an authority, and there are no concerns that I certainly have in my role with that. We do need to set a robust and balanced budget for next year, though, and it's critically important that we deliver against that balanced budget for next year. And when I say that we're working on proposals to bring forward to how we're going to ensure we do that better than we have done this year, it's to manage the risk of us getting too far into that 16 million of available budget reserves. Sorry for the long answer, but I think it's probably worth it given the complexity of the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You touched on something that I was going to come on to about the, on page 81 it says that a combination of agreed budget implementation plans not being fully implemented and ongoing costs and demand pressures have led to us overspending on what we thought would be a balanced budget. And you said that things are going to strategy and resources to try and make sure that that doesn't happen again. But surely, as a council, we thought that the BIPs would have been implemented anyway. So, what are the implications of not implementing the budget proposals, and how can we actually make sure that they are implemented?
So the implications of not implementing the budget proposals, to answer you directly, is that we would eat further into the reserves we have than we would be comfortable so doing, which would limit our ability to deal with significant issues were they to arise. For example, a 2007 sized flood at the same time as a major flu or other virus outbreak, for example, which may not necessarily result in government financial support in the same way that the COVID pandemic did. So we really are into some of those, multiple stress scenarios that are very, very unlikely to happen. That's why it's just important that we get the budget right this year and that we deliver on it. We knew we were taking some risks in last year's budget. That's why we set aside 25 million of reserves to manage timing and implementation risks associated with that budget position. You can do that once. We can't do it again.
I'm just mindful, thank you for that. I'm just mindful that we've drifted into item 12, which is the future budget. Any further questions on the month 6 monitoring? If not, there's a very simple recommendation to note the Council's financial position at the end of September 2022. Have we all noted it? I think that's a yes. Thank you. So we then move on to the item 12. And just a reminder, colleagues, that we'll discuss, first of all, the non-exempt publicly available information, and we'll go through that first, and if necessary, we can look at the exempt information after. So, Ryan?
Just to remind you, we do have a member of the public in. We do have a member of the public in now.
Okay, sorry.
So just be careful.
Members of the public, as I understand it, are welcome to stay for the next bit. But if we go into the one after, we may politely, thank you for a reminder. Right.
Thank you, Chair. As I've done in previous committees of this session, I will do everything I can to keep this in public rather than referring to private information or confidential information. So what you've got in front of you is a short report from me, which basically sets out the overview position of the Council's budget process. As out a few weeks ago, but actually the bottom line numbers haven't changed a great deal. Just some of the reasons and how we're getting there at the moment is slightly different. So, report to Strategy and Resources on the 12th of October summarised the Council's budget position, about an £80 million budget gap for next year that needed to be filled, with savings or income generation opportunities adding up to about 60 million as set out in that report. The policy committees at that stage had noted those, including this committee, had noted those savings and hadn't expressly approved them in all cases. And what we've been doing in the background since that Strategy and Resources meeting is working with the political parties to understand the extent to which the savings that have been proposed or noted by the committees are politically acceptable, and the extent to which we've been able to get broad political agreement. And by broad, I mean all three political groups have been able to say that whilst they're not necessarily happy with the savings, I think that would be stretching it too far. They are content for those savings to be put forward to full council for approval as part of the budget processes in February for housing and March for the rest. So some significant work being done, and progress continues to be made on taking those savings proposals, those income generation proposals, through the various political groups and discussions in the background. The Strategy and Resources Committee next week, in fact, will receive an update report on where we've got to with that process, and we'll discuss very briefly, with further information to follow, the steps that are going to be necessary to finish balancing the budget. So I'm not going to preempt that conversation yet because the ink isn't actually dry on that particular report. What it does mean is it's very unlikely, nigh on impossible, that we'll be coming back to individual policy committees for another round of savings. Two reasons really. One, you've already done a pretty good job of the work we've asked you to do so far, and two, frankly, there isn't time. So anything that involves final balancing of the budget will be done with Strategy and Resources Committee. Constitutionally, it's Strategy and Resources Committee's role to recommend a budget to full council in any event, but I'm confident that we'll be able to work with the Strategy and Resources Committee to finish the budget process off. The last thing that needs to land here is the local government finance settlement following the budget fiscal event, whatever you want to call it, that the Chancellor set out in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago. We're still waiting for some detail behind that announcement, but we are expecting the final position to be a little bit better than we have planned for in the medium-term financial analysis on which these budget numbers are based. Just waiting for that written confirmation before I say anything more. Very happy to take questions on this part of the report, Chair. And as you've said, if members do have any specific questions on the items for this committee, which I believe are unchanged from when they were last discussed here, then we will have to go into a closed session. But thank you.
Yes, thank you. My understanding is the items in the second part have already been discussed previously. So any questions on this part of the agenda, colleagues? Nope. Oh. Well, the recommendations are to note the update of the Council's 2023-24 budget position and endorse the budget proposals that we've seen before, set out in Appendix 1. Are we agreed? Anybody disagree? In that case, it's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Ryan. So I believe that concludes the business of the committee today. As we said right at the earlier point, the next formal meetings in February, but given the work programme, we may have to adjust that slightly or try and slip an extra meeting in. So thank you very much, colleagues. 4 minutes past the deadline. Not bad given everything we've discussed. Thank you very much.